Everyone, it's Classic DM, and as we continue to learn Pathfinder Second Edition, we're going to talk about a really cool subject called flanking. And a lot has changed over the last 40 years with the rules as written in Pathfinder Second Edition, which are the same as they were in First Edition, from what I've been told by people who are really hardcore First Edition players. Things have changed, so I kind of want to put this together to share what I've discovered and what I've learned, and maybe pose some questions for you. So I had a quick outline for you to show what we're going to go over. We're obviously going to go over the basic rules in Pathfinder Second Edition core rulebook. So if you want to follow along with the rulebook, you can do that as well. We're going to give you some tabletop examples of miniatures on a scale on one of our battle maps to show you versus large or medium enemies how flanking actually works in that situation. And we're going to actually have a number of situations where I'm going to make you try to figure out which character you actually think is really flanking and pass us a flanking test yourself, so you can kind of test yourself as you're following along with the video, which would be kind of cool. I had to test myself as well, because when I wrap my head around these rules, they're very different than what I was used to previously, which isn't bad, it's just different. So there's lots of these little situational challenges in this video, and then I want to do a little side note for a little bit, maybe like 2 or 3 minutes near the end, where we talk about the history of how the flanking and rear attacks work in RPGs and D&D, advanced D&D, and even in video games. And then we're going to play a little flanking chess at the end. So let's go ahead and get started right away. And if you haven't liked and subscribed my channel, please do so. It's really growing. Lots of people are really enjoying the videos we put together. I'd love to hear what you have to say about comments and suggestions. I interact with everyone who comments. So in these early days yet, while the channel is not huge and everything, there's a great chance for you to get involved and build yourself a reputation as someone who I like to engage with, because you're really cool and really like watching the videos and suggesting ideas and stuff like that. So remember, the goal of everything is to learn the game. Okay, so this is right out of the rule book, right? This is the rules on flanking right out of the rule book. Let's just take a look at that, right? An example that's in the playing the game chapter with Valeros, Kira, or Kyra, or Mauriciel, however you pronounce these characters' names. They had this little diagram they did, and this is their diagram. I just took a picture of my phone in the book. So in this situation, they're fighting an ogre, and number one, they say Valeros and Kara are flanking the ogre because they can draw a line to each other that passes through the opposite sides of the ogre's space. Now, ogre's a large creature. You'll see right away he's taking up, a 10-foot by 10-foot square on the grid. Everything is a 1-inch grid. Every 1 inch equals 5 feet by 5 feet. So therefore, he gets a flat-footed penalty and loses -2 to AC. So the people attacking him get to attack him as if his armor class is lower. They don't get a bonus to hit. They get a minus. He gets a detriment or a circumstance modifier to his armor class. Not really that different. It's kind of the same thing. The Mauriciel, which is the rogue at the top with the white hair, isn't flanking the ogre because she can't draw a line to Valeros and Kira. Now the line, if you read the rules on the right hand side, they're actually drawn from the center of the square, which is very wargamerish. A lot of old school war games, we use a tape measure. You're measuring from the center of the grid. If you play games like Squad Leader and some of the other games, some war games have you measure from the edge of the actual unit. So the measuring rules in Pathfinder 2, now I'm not a Pathfinder 1 player, so some of you guys already know that. You're going to be like, oh, I already got that. So they're measuring from the center of the square, not from the edges. And I've got some diagrams I put together that kind of make that a little clearer, because this diagram there, if you look at this diagram here, it just shows from edge to edge. It doesn't show from center to center. So in the example of Mauriciel isn't flanking, okay, because you draw the line from her to Valeros, it doesn't pass through the sides of the ogre's bounding box, really, or through the corners. And the very bottom, we talk about Sioni and Hobgoblin. We're going to skip that. So let's look at the right-hand side here, right? Here's the actual definition taken from page 476. When you and an ally are flanking a foe or an enemy, it has a harder time defending against you. A creature is flat-footed, so taking a -2 circumstance penalty to armor class or AC, the creatures that are flanking it. So if there's 2 of you, like in the picture there, Valeros and Kira, or whatever you say her name, I'm just going to call her Kira from this point forward until someone corrects me. You're both meleeing this guy, or could be meleeing him, like she could be doing an unarmed attack. She's flanking him, so when Kara makes her attack rolls to hit the ogre, his armor class is treated as if it's not as good. So if you had a high armor class like 23, now it's 21. And same thing for Valeros. So his armor class is debuffed, not your roll to hit boosted. So Valeros's roll to hit numbers, it's all determined. The number to beat is the armor class number anyway. So he's not getting an additional bonus to his roll. What's happening is the number to beat is getting lowered. So it's like debuffing the enemy. So geometrically, this is the part that's a little tricky for me, and I had to get my head wrapped around it. And a lot of people in the Facebook group were super cool at helping me get my head wrapped around it, because I first saw it, I was like, what? There's no facing direction. So to flank a foe, you and the ally must be on opposite sides or corners. So in this diagram here, it only shows 2 people on opposite sides. So if you look at the square of the ogre, There's 4 sides to a square. They're on opposite sides, not adjacent sides. So, Mauricio's on an adjacent side. If there was someone at standing number 3, they would be on an adjacent side. Kira's on the opposite side. So almost like you could draw a line through the whole bounding box, if you want to call it, of the ogre, and if it goes through both of the parallel lines of the square that the enemy's occupying, then you're considered on opposite sides. So the line's drawn between the center of your space and the center of your ally space that must pass through it. So if you were to draw a line from Valeros to Kira, not like in the diagram here, which is actually inaccurate, you would draw like from the center of Kira's nose all the way to the center of Valeros' nose. And we're going to take that in hand and put it on our little battle glass and see what that works out with some of our cool enemies that we have too. So another detail, kind of like a criteria you got to meet here, is both you and the ally, in this case Valeros and Kira, have to be wielding melee weapons, right? Or able, not having to, able to make an unarmed attack. So you could be standing there casting spells right next to the guy, but he's not sure whether you're going to swing at him or not, but you don't actually have to be in the act of trying to make a melee swing or have a melee weapon in your hand ready to swing. So the enemy's not sure what you're going to do. You start doing some kind of manipulate action or trying to do a touch attack or something like that. They're kind of considering close enough with able to make an unarmed attack. That means you're not doing something like holding a case of beer in your hands are filled up, or your hands are bound behind your back, you're caught in a web spell. Just being nearby isn't enough to cause this debuff to the enemy's armor class. So that's very interesting, because if you're standing there with a bow in your hand, you're not able to make a melee attack, but you might be able to do a ranged attack. But it specifically says a melee attack, because when you're defending against melee attacks, you're not defending against the guy with the bow. Now, if someone came up and stood 5 feet away from me and pulled out a bow, I'd probably try to defend, try to hit the bow with my hand. So it's kind of a weird little area, but they're trying to keep the game streamlined and fast, which I don't have a problem with that at all. So this is something. The last thing you might want to consider is the reach element. So you have to be able to reach each other. You're not really threatening someone in combat if you're not able to reach them. Like if you couldn't hit them. So if Kyra or Valeros was 1 square back, they wouldn't be able to hit you. Great. There's a quick snapshot of the rules. Let's look at some cool examples, right? So in this, and we see the miniatures in a lot of my other episodes and shows like that. Well, who's flanking in this situation? So you've got this big frost giant, right here in the middle. Looks like he's facing the, Mercedes, the warrior with a 2-handed weapon. You've got Obscura in the upper right-hand corner casting a spell, standing directly underneath a stalactite. You got another frost giant off to the right. And I did tokens and minis, so you can see how the bounding boxes and the occupied squares are really 10 foot by 10 foot for these large creatures. We got a monk attacking the frost giant in the lower right hand corner, and the 2 unpainted minis are dudes with sword and shield. So think of them as fighters like Valeros in Pathfinder Second Edition. So who do you think is actually flanking what? So only the 2 unpainted minis, only the 2 fighters are flanking the frost giant. And why isn't the monk flanking? Well, there's not another ally on the other side of the frost giant. In the lower right hand corner, the monk with the red hair and the green pants and a flowing flight robe using a quarterstaff. She's right in range to attack the frost giant. He's facing her, but there's a caster out of reach using her hand, because the reach of your hand, she's doing a manipulate action. Maybe she can do cone of cold or prismatic spray, who knows. She's not threatening him in a melee sense. So on the right hand side, that little encounter, the monk's not getting a flat-footed bonus. She's just attacking the frost giant at his regular armor class number. Now on the left hand side, this is what's very interesting. Now we do have the 2 unpainted minis, which is the 2 fighters, sword and board type guys, which is actually from the same WizKid pack. They're attacking this frost giant. One's like kind of behind his back right leg, the other guy's kind of back behind his left shoulder. That sounds fantastic. You can even see I've turned the frost giant to kind of like, he's got his back turned to one guy, he's not looking at the other, but the frost giant seems to be focus firing on the one character. But in Pathfinder 2e, the way the enemy facing isn't taken into consideration. Now when you first see that, you may be like, yeah, that's the way it's always been. If you're a really old school guy, you'd be like, what? And so that's an element we're going to talk about at the end of the video. So in this situation, even though she's got an ally on the opposite side of her, because she's at a corner, I'm talking about the fighter in the upper right hand corner, which kind of looks like a Miri the Barbarian mini, I think that's what it is. So the lower left hand fighter with the sword and shield, the unpainted miniature, and the barbarian in the upper right hand corner, she's on a corner, he's on a face. So drawing from the corner through the face, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't give her the debuff effect. She's not flanking the frost giant. Now, in the normal world, we would think of flanking as being something like, I'm kind of behind you, dude. I'm behind you. You're being flanked. How many times you heard in World War II, the Germans are flanking us, right? That means they're getting behind you, or they're coming on from the sides. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in detail as well later on. Let's go to the next one, right? Who's flanking in this situation? We got a stinky orc in the middle, and we got a number of people just melee collapsing on this guy. We've got in the far left corner, we got a sword and board guy, a warrior, kind of like Valeros. We got a cleric with a morning star in his hand. An orc in the middle looks kind of distraught. Next to two stalagmites, bunch of bones on the ground. Another guy with a glaive, and then another painted me with a sword and board. Then we got like a rogue dude with a hatchet in his hand, right? So who do you think is actually flanking there? Think about that for a second. So according to the test, okay, 4 of the 5 characters in this situation are going to get the advantage of attacking the orc flat-footed. So the sword and board unpainted mini in the lower right-hand corner, or the southeast corner around, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, he's not getting that bonus because there's no one on the opposite corner. You see that? You almost have to have someone at the opposite corner for that to work for him. But the other two, it's like, perfectly fine, XY axis, someone's behind you, so the orc's having to defend. Now, in reality, the game isn't reality. In reality, I wouldn't want to have to fight 4 people. Well, you have a tough time. You'd have to turn your back. No matter what you do, you would expose your back to someone. And this is where some players who come from other kinds of games, like video games, or from really hardcore war games, or very hardcore melee-oriented games, or old A&D players who use the Dungeon Master's Guide, or very miniature-centric type of games, the facing direction means a big deal. You don't shoot a Melta out of your butt in Warhammer 40k kind of thing, right? But it's okay, because Pathfinder's combat's really fast. They're just trying to give you the general location. Every turn is only 6 seconds, so there's a lot of moving and shuffling going on, and they're trying to imply that, well, you can actually kind of know that someone's there, and you can turn and defend and roll your shoulders and all this kind of stuff. They're leaving all that to your imagination. Let's keep going here. In this situation, who's flanking? No one's flanking. Now, even though there's an ally next to you, if you think about it, the ally's on the adjacent leg of the square. But you would think that, one guy's attacking him from the side, right? Isn't that the flank? If I told you were going to get a piece of steak and it was a flank steak, you would think it's from the side of the calf. So there's a lot of other things in our references in the world that confuse the word flanking. No, you have to think of it as a game term. Let's look at another example, right? Who's flanking in this situation? So only the 2 guys directly across from each other are flanking. So once again, there is a side face on the orc, the back of the orc, and the front of the orc. The guy is on the side, is attacking the side. He doesn't have an ally where he can draw that line through the orc and go through either side or either corner. And all these examples are doing these very perpendicular because they're keeping it super simple. Let's go on to another one. Who's flanking in this situation? Nobody. Kind of hard to believe, isn't it? So according to the test in the rule book, if I understand it correctly, please leave a comment and correct me if you think I'm wrong. This is the way I've understood it, and I discussed it with people in the Facebook group forum, is that how can someone be behind someone and not get the flanking bonus? Well, it's kind of implied that there's a lot of movement and mobility. The orc is aware of everyone. He doesn't have to turn 180 degrees around and defend himself. He can kind of position himself in a way where he can keep everyone kind of in his eyes. So you can turn to the right and kind of keep an eye on the rogue, and turn to the left and keep his track of the unpainted little warrior with a sword and board. But he also knows about the guy with the glaive. So it's not like he's completely 180 degree flank. Now, if you look at this, technically, it's almost a 270 degree arc. That's where when you first get in the game, you start playing, you're like, wait a minute, that's a 270 degree arc. That's kind of crazy, huh? So, read the rules as written and keep it by the book, and that's the kind of test we're doing. Let's go do another test, okay? Who's flanking in this situation? Who do you think's flanking? Well, it's really not that hard. You got it by now, right? Only 2 guys who are directly across from each other, the warrior with the glaive and the warrior with the sword and shield. But once again, the rogue, now in AD&D, he can backstab, but in Pathfinder Second Edition, he's not. There's things related to weapons you can do that give you a backstab trait on the weapon type if you're in certain positions. But in this situation, he's not flanking. The orc is not flat-footed. So there's no sneak attack or any of that kind of stuff happening, unless he's coming out of stealth, if I'm not mistaken. Let's keep going. Let's do another one, right? So who's flanking in this situation? So all 3, everyone's attacking the orc. The orc is facing the wrong way. The way these tokens work in my game world is the token is facing the way that it would be facing if you stood him up vertically. So he's looking down to the bottom of the screen. Like, for example, the orc off to the left, he's looking down to the bottom of the screen. The miniatures are pointed the way they're facing, right? So in this situation, nobody's flanking. How about this next one? Who's flanking here, right? Only the 2 guys directly across from each other are flanking. So it's very perpendicular, but there is a possibility for it being a diagonal. Let's look at another one. How about this? This is more confusing. This is the way you kind of see it when you're playing, right? You're on the table, you got the grid. The grid's kind of at an angle. In this situation, I've got a battle glass, which gives you kind of an offset. You have a little refracting light offset about a 1/4 of an inch. This glass is a 1/4 inch off the top of the battle map, so we can draw with dry erase markers. Who's flanking, right? Is it the two fighters at the bottom? There's no one hidden behind the frost giant. There's no extra dude behind the frost giant. So you got two unpainted minis, which is sword and board fighters. You got a monk on the right, you got a barbarian on the left, and you got a rogue in the back. Who's flanking? Well, according to the rules, this is what's flanking. So I put the yellow mark to say, once again, it's a large creature, so it's 10 foot by 10 foot, and you can see the barbarian to the monk is flank. So either if the barbarian's attacking, the creature's treated as if he has -2 AC. If the monk's it's her turn, the creature and using unarmed attacks or whatever she wants to do. This is not considering feats, right? This is just the basics, it's starting point. The frost giant for the barbarian, the frost giant for the monk has his armor class debuffed. Now we've got a rogue in the back, and we've got two dudes standing side by side, good old shield wall type action going on. Every single one of those guys is getting a flanking bonus as well. That means the frost giant, no matter who attacks in melee here, the frost giant's armor class is dropped by 2. You're not getting a bonus to hit. The armor class is lowered on the enemy because he can't defend himself as well. That's why it's kind of like a debuff, if you can think of it that way. And God forbid he trip on those skulls there, right? This is from the Glacial Rift, the Frost Giant Jarl, the White Dragon Cave. Let's go to another one. So who's flanking in this situation? We moved people a little bit, right? So our fighters are spread out a little bit. They're on the corners. We have two fighters on the corners, the monk and the barbarian in the same spot, and the rogue is in the same spot. So just taking a half step, right, that you can do in your movement. If the fighters, two fighters, took a half step to maybe avoid being hit by a breath weapon or something like that, guess what happens? Not as many people get the flanking bonus anymore. So only now the monk and the barbarian get a flanking bonus. That's because there's not an ally that meets the test for drawing the line through the square. So this is very tricky. So your instincts tell you that, well, yeah, the dude's surrounded, man. He's got the rogue's never moved. He's still behind the guy. He's looking the wrong way. Well, the rules don't take in consideration facing direction. They just do this geometric check with the implied idea that the enemy inside that square is actively able to keep its eyes and peripheral vision and move and look at everyone. Let's take a look at another one. Okay, who's flanking this situation? We've got 3 stinky orcs on the ground. They're all looking south to the bottom. You got one orc right in front of one unpainted mini, another orc with a busted up head in front of another painted mini. You got another orc in the back. Think maybe he just landed there getting ready to move. He's trying to get through. Barbarian is attacking the orc. One unpainted mini fighters fighting the orc right in front of him. The other guy's fighting the orc in front of him. The assassin type guy with a big black and the brown boots, he's attacking the orc with the bandage on his head, and the monk's whacking a dude with a baseball bat in the back of the head. So who's doing the flanking here? What's the answer to this one? Only those two. So only the fighter and the assassin, if they were attacking the same target, that is, are going to get the flanking bonus. So in this situation, not the assassin, I'm using AD&D terms, the rogue. So if the rogue is attacking the orc that's got the bandage over his head, he debuffs he's getting the flat-footed bonus. So that orc's armor class is lowered by 2. But in our situation, on the table, someone's probably said that I'm attacking the orc directly in front of me. But that fighter, if he would turn and attack the orc to his right, which he could do, he doesn't have to turn the miniature. Like, it's not a miniature rotation game. He could just say, well, my miniature's not turned, but I can attack the adjacent guy in the adjacent square. So if the left-hand fighter, say, unpainted miniature, were to attack the orc with the bandage over his head, he would get the bonus because the armor of the orc is lowered by 2. Interesting. So you don't have to move and turn your miniature around. That's one big debate item. A lot of people are like, what are you talking about? You don't need to do that. So I want to talk about that. And of course, in the lower left-hand corner of that illusion is just going to drop a fireball and kill everyone. So who's flanking in this situation? We've got this big bugbear and one guy sword and board. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, right? No one's flanking anyone here. It's just one-on-one, big fight, nasty fight, no big deal. Other people coming in the back. I mean, that's great. Now, technically in the game, they don't even need to be facing each other. You get the miniatures turned all kinds of directions, but I like to turn them and make it kind of look like they're fighting each other. It's kind of like playing chess. When you play chess, you don't take your knight out and turn the knight facing back towards you. You sort of turn the chess piece to look kind of implying like, well, they're going that way, So let's go to another one. Who's flanking in this situation? So we got this big. Sorry, I'm not a great miniature painter. Please forgive my unpainted miniatures, but they look cool. So who's flanking in this situation? Bugbear, 2 fighters. Guess who's flanking? No one. Who's flanking here? No one. This is tricky, right? So that fighter in the back is at a corner. The fighter in the front, face him head on, is on a flat edge of the square. So you don't trace from square, flat edge to corner, make a curve. It's got to be across the flat or across the diagonal. And I did a sketch later on in this little series of photographs that'll make it much clearer, I think. Let's go to the next one. This is the facing debate. So in real life, right? In the game, there's who's flanking, right? Who's flanking here? Well, I think that both of them are flanking, yeah? They are. They do. They meet the test, right? Let's go back one. But this kind of a debate here. Well, isn't the guy in the back getting some kind of a bonus for whacking the guy in the back? He can't actively defend, can he? Well, that's what the -2 to armor class is. In fact, the -2 to armor class benefits both of you. So if the bugbear had just attacked the fighter in the front here, right? You don't then say that, well, since he's attacking the guy in the front and now it's your turn, and it's a 6-second turn, everyone's taking their chance, and within 1 second, after 500 milliseconds, it doesn't just apply to who's facing who. That bugbear it's implied that the bugbear is able to kind of take a swing at you and kind of keep track of who's behind him. So in this situation, it's a little bit different, right? So like we said, both characters, both player characters, both fighters are going to be attacking the bugbear as if his armor class was down by 2. All right, let's do another one here. So this is another facing debate thing, right? So you've got the fighter attacking the bugbear seemingly from behind, right? And you've got a rogue attacking the bugbear head on. So who's getting the flanking bonus here, right? They both are. So the fighter attacking from behind, the rogue is attacking face to face, but because they're opposite of each other, they're putting the guy under duress. It's like if you're playing basketball and you're dribbling the ball and you're standing still and you got someone behind you trying to steal the ball and someone in front of you trying to steal the ball. If you're playing hockey, the same kind of thing, you kind of know they're there. Like you're not like, oh, gee, I had no idea there was a dude behind me. You know they're there. You just turn your head a little bit, peripheral vision picks them up. And even though you take a second to pull up and take a shot, you know someone's there. You know someone might reach in. So that flinching kind of moment's being implied in Pathfinder 2, which is kind of cool. It also helps the game go a little faster, right? So let's talk about the facing debate some more. I want to give you, I'm not arguing for changing the rules, but I just want to tell you why I think some people may have trouble with this, especially for me when I first got into it, right? So Pathfinder 2e doesn't have any rules for facing direction. There's an implied level of defensive savvy. So even though in this picture here, the rogue is able to backstab if you're playing AD&D, the bugbear, and the fighter isn't going to do anything special because he's just facing him front on. Both the fighter and the rogue in this picture are getting the flat-footed bonus by making sure the bugbear's armor class is lowered by 2. That's because he can't sufficiently defend himself as well as he could if there was only one of you. So he's having to keep track of 2 targets. So it's implied the defensive savvy of the target that he's able to actually defend against the rogue's attacks and the fighter's attacks, but it requires additional effort, so therefore his armor class is lowered. Now, if you're an RPG MMO player, 180-degree flanking check, which I've drawn here in the middle, see the dashed line going through the middle? There's the back, and then there's the front. So if you're playing EverQuest 1, the rogue, which you should be doing as a DPSer, you're flanking, you're in the back. You know why you do that? Because you don't want to get riposted, because there's auto-riposte in Daiku mode-oriented games like EverQuest 1, and that carried over to EverQuest 2. If you're playing a Nightblade in Dark Age of Camelot, there was attacks that required you to attack from the front. Whether you're doing Perforate Artery, you had to do Perforate Artery from the front. There was a positional attacks. It was just the front and the back. Warhammer Online, there's a flanking tactics for the Witch Elves and a Witch Hunter. So if you're attacking from behind or from the sides, you get a 15% damage bonus. World of Warcraft even has things where you're attacking someone from behind. Like you do ambush, you're playing a rogue. Well, you need to do it from behind. Some attacks didn't work if you were doing it from the front. So in this situation, the front and the rear and the word flank are kind of being muddled together a little bit. In Black Desert Online, there's tons of attacks where you do tremendous more damage you're attacking from behind. There's even attacks in Neverwinter, which is based on 4th edition AD&D, that will do an attack from behind, does additional damage. And I forgot the name for it. It has a funky name for it. Now, they've recently taken Neverwinter and kind of 5E'd it a little bit. But now, of course, Rift had the same thing. In Rift, you could set up macros where, like, only do this move if I'm in the right position. Some moves wouldn't even fire off at all if you're not in the right position, so you can macro it. And of course, in Black Desert Online, like I mentioned a few moments ago, you can do a lot more damage when someone's knocked down or prone or from behind. So these kinds of experiences, you have players who are playing video games, or people that come from old school AD&D, or maybe come from a war game where the facing direction makes a big difference. But when you get into Pathfinder 2e, it's not as particular. And why is that, right? And look at the blue phrase lower right corner. It's not because Pathfinder 2e is not cool. It's because these other games are encouraging player control. So in AD&D, there wasn't a lot of feats. There wasn't any reactions. There wasn't this 3-action economy. It was just run up and attack or do something else. The rogue would stay stealth. The thief or the assassin in that game would stay stealth and then try to get a backstab off, because backstab could be quadruple damage when you got higher levels. Very, very nasty. There's no sneak attack. There's no knocking someone down prone. There's no attack of opportunity in AD&D. It's the baby version of the game done over 41 years ago. So these games, the video games, they encourage a player to move around. Otherwise, you just run up there and stand there and swing until somebody died. It'd be boring. You might as well just be playing Rock'em Sock'em Robot. So the encouragement of player control in video games came from the backstab idea in AD&D from 78, 79, 1980. So it's kind of funny how it permeated that way. But as we started getting miniatures, which would allow us to actually clearly demonstrate who's facing who, people didn't want to make rules where you had to keep turning your miniature, then there was rules of where your facing direction was. Now if you play Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Fantasy, there's a lot of templates. Like if you're using certain types of weapons, they're going to hit templates. And we have templates in our D&D games as well. But the player's maintenance of the miniature's facing direction and babysitting all that kind of stuff is not a requirement. The emphasis has gone, a lot of people call it the theater of the mind. Theater of the mind to me is something different, but that's okay. They're just saying, we're having a big combat fight, I'm defending myself, he's defending himself, I'm not getting a bonus because I turned my little rook different ways. So if you're playing chess, you're occupying a square with your knight, it doesn't matter which way the piece is facing, it doesn't make any difference. Your moves are going to be the same. So all this stuff together, it kind of gives you a sense of like, where did this come from? And why when some people see the rules, it's kind of like, whoa. So when you're playing Pathfinder 2, remember, the facing direction doesn't matter. It's just the geometric traces that make a big difference. Let's go take a look at that real quick. This is old school AD&D from a long time ago. In AD&D, they had a dexterity. If you had a high dexterity, you would have a thing that would modify a number that would modify your armor class. Okay, and they still have that in Pathfinder. So you're really high dexterity means you're very agile. You can move. You can be like Floyd Mayweather and duck stuff and move around, or Conor McGregor's head movement, or whatever you got. Right. So you would have modifiers to dexterity armor class adjustment. Now, if you got attacked from the rear flank, the rear are strikes from completely behind where you're virtually unable to see the attack coming. You couldn't use your dexterity bonus to your armor class. So say you had a dexterity bonus that reduced your armor class by 2. Now in AD&D, the armor class numbers were different. You wanted a low number. It went from 10 all the way down to 0 and then into the negatives, to usually around a -10. So let's say you were normally wearing leather armor, you had an armor class of like 7, and you had a really great dexterity, now dropped it down to armor class 5. You effectively had the same armor class as someone wearing splint mail or scale mail and stuff like that. But if someone attacked you from, you read the rules here, the rear flank or the rear, or strikes from behind, you didn't get that bonus anymore because you're unaware of the attack. Because in that game, the combat was a full minute long, right? Even though it was broken down into 6-second segments, they're implying that if you're getting attacked from behind like that, you have an opportunity to get backstabbed, all kinds of stuff's going to happen. So they had 2 types of attacks. They had flanks, which you can see on the right-hand side. No one uses hexes, by the way. That's more of a World War II war game thing like Panzer Leader and Squad Leader. But you can see there's a front, and a front flank, and a front flank, defender in the middle, and then rear. So they're using flank and rear. So flank attacks, they negated no dexterity bonus and no shield, meaning that like you had a shield in your left hand and your right hand, you couldn't pin the shield over to the other side and defend yourself. Now, we all know that if you're holding a shield in your left hand and someone attacks you from the left-hand side, it's probably much easier to hold the shield up. But they decided even back then to go, no, we're not going to make it a dexterous side, ambidextrous one side, shield on the left, shield on the right. You'd have players running, what hand is your shield in? It would just get bogged down. The rear attack thing, people attacking from behind would get a +2 to hit. Well, that's kind of funny because in Pathfinder Second Edition, what are you doing to the enemy? Well, the enemy's getting his armor class lowered by 2. So you don't have to roll as high in Pathfinder 2 because the armor class number is lower, but in old AD&D, what we do is say, well, you get a bonus to your roll. So that made it much easier for you to hit things. So it's still kind of taking advantage of the basic idea of being flanked, but the thing they're doing in Pathfinder Second Edition is you could be in the front, and because your friend is behind, both of you are getting that bonus. That's one thing that's very, very different. Kind of interesting to take your head on, get your head wrapped around it. Let's go on a little bit further here. So you really need to think about flanking chess. This is our last few minutes of this video here. I want to just go through this pretty quickly. What I encourage you to do, take a look at this diagram, right? Bad guy in the middle. Now, bad guys don't stand still. Let's say this guy stands still. You basically have the X, Y, Z axis, and then the other parts of the cardinal points, northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest. And you got everyone filling up one of those points, right? You have 8 characters on screen, and pretend that they're all melee classes for the time being. And no one's trying to cast a spell or twiddle thumbs. So when you're playing the game and you get your turn, if the bugbear just went and all the other players got a chance to do a turn, which they could do a stride or do a take in the range and then do a strike attack. Respond to party positioning. So be aware of the attack of opportunity, and you've probably seen it happen. If you get close to mob and you step into a square, he may get a free swing at you. So if you don't want to get hurt too bad, you have to watch out for that. Now in 3rd edition, that was kind of paralyzing, but in Pathfinder 2nd edition, there's not as many attacks of opportunity happening anymore. Not all the enemies can do it, so you can kind of just jump in the fray and go for it. Let the class that needs to flank actually have it. So if you got a class that gets tremendous benefits by flanking things, and you'll learn this as you play the different classes, let them take the flank. Now it doesn't mean take the rear. It means give them the flank as soon as you possibly can. Don't screw up their flank by taking a square that's going to ruin it for them. That's kind of hard to think about, but just think about that quickly. So we're going to go through this step by step. Now don't worry about the facing direction and focus fire the enemy, obviously. If all of you are attacking different enemies all over the place, it's going to be statistically longer fight. People are going to take more damage. People are going to exhaust more ray shields. All kinds of stuff's going to happen. People are going to chug potions, cast spells, disengage, get hit, get killed. If all you collapse on one guy, the guy's going to be dead in less than one turn for everyone. In fact, you might die in the first 2 hits from the more powerful DPSers. So focus fire stuff. And if you can focus fire, kind of focus fire in a way where you could get that armor class drop by 2, which is a tremendous drop. It's like 10% less of the armor class if it only went up to 20. So box that enemy also to take advantage of reactions. So as you box the enemy in flanking chess here, if someone has the attack of opportunity, you want to be in there. So if he tries to disengage from you right away. Okay, let's move on and take a look at the examples, right? What's the first step? So the first thing that happens here, we have this glaive fighter, two-handed weapon, get right in the face of the bugbear and go wham. Now if the bugbear moves at all, that fighter is going to have an attack of opportunity and be able to nail this guy. So great. Now he can't go anywhere. So if the hobgoblin had the bugbear, had the turn next, and he tried to weasel out of there and run for it and run between the gap between the fighter and the monk, he would get nailed on the way out, maybe even knocked down, maybe even a shove. So that's the first thing. Now let's say that your turn is the next player. What do you want to do? Say you're the other fighter, right? The other fighter immediately can move from behind and flank. So he now gets an easier chance to hit the bugbear with the other fighter. So that's an interesting move because it was his turn next. Now if he had moved to the square adjacent, he wouldn't get the flanking bonus. So by taking the one step and then tacking, all 3 of his attacks or 2 of his attacks or whatever move he's going to do, one of his feats, is immediately getting the armor class lower, which is going to be the thing dies faster. That's what you want to have happen. Let's see what the next move is, right? Let's say the next move is the other fighter. Well, he's going to go ahead and just take a step forward because he doesn't want to block anyone's opportunity to do any flanking. Now, if he had moved, there's nowhere for him to move at all to gain flank on his turn. So he's decided that I'm going to take the corner, right? I'm front facing. Maybe I'll do one of my abilities that knocks the guy down, debuffs them, snares them, causes a bleed. I start doing other forms of damage to help the situation and hopeful that someone else will take the other flank position and get the bonus. He's going to be rolling to hit with 2 numbers higher than the thief and the warrior that you see with the glaive. Let's go down to the next one, right? So the next thing we have is the rogue, right? The rogue's like, well, thanks for setting that up, fighter, because now you create an opportunity for me to flank from behind so he could probably sneak attack. So because you took the corner, notice this is our first example of this, the rogue took the corner. So that meets the original criteria of the flank rule, either opposite sides or opposite corners. So if you draw a line between the green dot of the rogue and the unpainted warrior mini in the lower fighter mini in the lower left hand corner, it draws along that diagonal. So corner to corner or side to side. So that means immediately, as soon as he takes that one step and gets the situation, now both of them, not just yourself, not just the thief, both of them are going to get the flanking bonus. So even after this, the 4th player is moved, even if it's only a 4-person party, which the game is really designed to be, everyone in the group now immediately has a flanking bonus. That means the armor class of the bugbears drop by 2 for every attack roll. And that's fantastic. Just a quick little step of doing it in a certain order starts building upon that flanking bonus. So let's just pretend the other people are involved. We got a really big adventure, lots of hard stuff, and we got 8 players are playing, right? So what happens next? So the barbarian takes another corner. Now in this kind of situation, it's kind of tactical. Because the barbarian's taking this corner, there's no escape to the right. Right? There's no way to exit out of the fight. They can't move through, the cleric can't move through, the rogue can't move through these other enemies. So by doing this, she also is allowing an opportunity for the cleric, the guy on the right, which could be could be kind of a battle cleric guy, could be a melee-centric cleric with a certain kind of doctrine, right? War priest type doctrine. That's a smart move to make. Just get in there, start taking wailing damage right away. Let's take a look at the next step. So to take advantage of that, the monk takes the corner. So just like when the rogue takes the corner, the monk takes the corner. So now we have 6 characters on screen with the flanking bonus. Because the monk is perpendicular from the barbarian, flanking bonus. Because the thief is perpendicular from the unpainted warrior in the lower left-hand corner, flanking bonus. Because the sword and board warrior, fighter at the top, and the glaive fighter with the blonde hair at the bottom, flanking bonus. So all 6 now have a flanking bonus. This guy's toast. So what's left to do? There's only 2 more unoccupied squares. Well, if you're a cleric, take a step forward. Now he's not going to get any flanking bonus at all. Nothing. So he's stepping into a square right next to the enemy, but he can't draw from side to side, and he's not on a corner. So it's like the cardinal point rule. You can see with the dry erase marker line here, he can't go through, he's not getting any bonus, right? The last one, obviously, if you had the illusionist collapse on the other side, then it creates the flanking bonus for everyone else. Now, if you ever had this situation happen in your game, you probably laugh because this guy's being gangbanged. But usually you don't want to have that kind of stuff happening. So flanking chess, right? Respond to party positioning, be aware of attack of opportunity, let the class that needs to flank have it. Prompt them like, I'm going to move here, so if you take that next spot, we're going to both get it. Don't worry about the facing direction. Box enemies to take advantage of the reactions, and think about that kind of stuff, right? And I think that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all I want to talk about. Yeah. That's it. That's it for flanking today. Now remember, be sure to like and subscribe, grow the channel, and if you have any requests or details you want, I've done a lot of different formats lately of the videos. If you like the WTF sketch method, or you like the actual videos where we're showing up close shots of the minis, that's cool. If you like to have the stuff like this, it's more fast and quick and referenced, you can do that. Give me some feedback what I can do to improve the channel for you, especially as we kick into the school semester coming up here, right? We don't have as much time to watch videos anymore. All right, have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. This is Classic DM. Hope you enjoyed this learning Pathfinder 2e with flanking.